Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We will be discussing here what is listening, what is teaching listening skills, how teaching listening skills originated and how did it develop with the passage of time, what are the principles of teaching listening skills, and what are some of the classroom techniques and tasks in teaching listening skills. First, what is listening skills? Listening is an active, purposeful process of making sense of what we hear. There are 4 skills in language learning or language use. 2 skills are said to be receptive and 2 skills are said to be productive. Listening and reading are receptive skills, while writing and speaking are known as productive skills. Because we receive information through listening or reading, and we produce information through speaking and writing. For this reason, people sometimes think that listening is receptive, so it is a passive skill. But listening is a very active skill. It is never ever passive. Why? Because we do not only listen, we also process whatever we listen in our mind. This process helps us in understanding what we listen. And we create meaning through this processing information in our minds. As Brooke pointed out, the assumptions that listeners simply decode message is mistaken. They do not decode message. Whatever they listen, they process that information in their minds based on a number of different knowledge sources. Those sources are the knowledge of language. First, you understand the language in which an information is transferred to you. Second, you know the context. Third, your background knowledge about that information. And only then you can create meaning out of what you hear. That's why listening is meaning based. When we listen, we are normally doing so for a purpose. You might even say we do not listen to the words, we listen to the meanings. Listening is usually compared with reading skills, and there might be some similarities, but there are some major differences between these two. First, listening usually happens in real time. There is no time for revision. You listen and you comprehend it immediately because you have to respond. So there is no go back and review. Secondly, although listening is receptive, it is very open in the midset of conversation, something which requires productive spoken responses. Thus, we can say that listening skills is a receptive skill, but it is a very active skill because we create meaning out of what we hear from others. Thus, in simple words, understanding what you hear is listening, and hearing something without understanding is not listening. Okay, let's discuss the background to teaching listening skills. Historically, learning a language meant learning to read and write. Listening was often ignored in the teaching learning process. In the late 1800s, interest in using children learning for their first language as model for first language teaching grew. One of the result was Govan series method. In this method, the teacher used to make a series of statements and the student used to repeat those statements after the teachers. This was further developed in the language teaching methodologies, and when direct method was introduced, formal focus was given to the teaching listening skills, because in target language the information was transferred to the students in the target language, and thus it was necessary for the student to listen to that language in order to learn it. In the years following World War II, another method was introduced, audiolingual method, that was based on behaviorism, which emphasized mimicry and memorization, and this memorization and mimicry was solely based on listening skills. Thus, as in the direct method, informations or dialogues or text was presented orally to the students, before teaching them reading and writing. The opportunity of the audio-lingual method paralleled the establishment of language laboratories for dialogues and patterns practice drills. In 1970s and early 80s, the introduction of communicative language teaching affected teaching listening skills. As the focus was shifted to teach language to the students in order to make them able to communicate. And what is communication? Communication is a process of sending a message which the receivers receive and understand. So, in communicative language teaching, listening skill was given focus, and when the Christian input hypothesis was introduced, it further strengthened teaching listening skills. The input hypothesis says that for language learning to occur, it is necessary for the learner to understand input language, which contains linguistic items that are slightly beyond the learner's present linguistic competence. Learners understand such language using cues in the situation. Simply, we acquire language by meeting language that is a bit higher than our current level. Listening was seen as a major source of comprehensible input. Language learning textbooks began to include listening activities that were not simply presentation of language to be produced. They were listening activities for input, the beginning of the kinds of listening tasks common in books today. And that is how teaching listening skills was focused with the passage of time. Now, how to teach listening skills? There are some principles for teaching listening skills. The first principle for teaching listening skill is expose your students to different ways of processing information. Bottom up and top down approach. To understand how people make sense of stream of sounds we all hear, it is helpful to think about how we process the input. A useful metaphor often used to explain reading but equally applicable to listening is bottom up and top down, processed by Rumilhart and Orteny 1977. These two approaches are used by the learners to comprehend what they hear or read. What is bottom up and what is top down approaches? Bottom up approach is when you go from words to sentences, and from sentences to paragraphs, and from paragraphs to larger chunks of language. On the other hand, a top-down learner starts from their background knowledge, either content schema, general information based on previous learning and life experience, or textual schema, awareness of the kind of information used in the given situation. And then they come to the minute details of the text or of the information presented to them in a language. Now imagine a brick wall. If you are standing at the bottom, you can study each and every brick, but it is very difficult for you to see the whole view of the wall. On the other hand, if you are standing on the wall, it might be difficult for you to see every brick, but it is very easy for you to have a full overview of the wall. One is bottom up and the other is top down approach. Many students, especially those with years of school English, have learned the methods that stress the parts of English, vocabulary, grammatical structures. So it is not a surprise that students usually start learning a language with bottom-up approach. We first teach them words, then sentences, then grammar, then paragraphs, and then longer essays. They know words, then they understand these sentences, and then they understand the full ideas of whatever they listen. So it becomes difficult for the beginner level students to teach listening skills through top-down approach, because they are somehow unable to understand the overall view or the gist of whatever they hear. Why? Because they need to understand the small bits and parts of that language in order to understand the whole idea. Look at this example. Read it from the right side. When you process English slowly, one word at a time, as you are doing now, it is easy to catch the meaning of each individual word. However, it is very difficult to understand the overall meaning of the passage. If you are focusing on bottom-up approach, it is difficult for you to get the overall message. You understand the paragraph when you process English slowly, one word at a time, as you are doing now. It is easy to catch the meaning of each individual word. However, it is very difficult to understand the overall meaning. While reading, however, it is likely you felt the frustration of bottom-up processing. You had to get each individual part before you could make sense of it. This is similar to what your student experience, and they are having to wrestle with the meaning in foreign language. Their previous training in language learning, this bottom-up processing habit gets in the way of effective listening. The opposite type of processing, top-down, begins with the listener's life knowledge. Now there is an example given by Brown. He says that I was in German and I did not know how to speak German. A lady came to me and she asked me something in German language. Although I was unable to understand the meaning of the words, but when she added 2-3 words, I came to know with my knowledge, background knowledge, that she is asking about a church. Thus, she has used bottom-up vocabulary by making use of previous knowledge. This personal experience of the writer explains how he had combined both bottom-up and top-down approaches in understanding what the German woman asked. In this real-life example, a woman pronounced one word, Capella. The writer didn't know what does it mean, Capella. She asked again. Now he has used his life experience, his background knowledge, because he was sitting in front of a building, in front of a church, and he understood chapel, the name of that church. So he said, no, it is not Sistine Chapel, and thus he pointed out to a building that is the desired building she wants to go. Now this is what happened naturally with the writer, but the bottom and top down approaches could be artificially combined in the classroom by a teacher in teaching listening skills. Like you can see it in my case, the writer says this top down bottom up integration happened by accident. In the classroom, pre-listening activities are a good way to make sure it happens. Before listening, learners can, for example, brainstorm vocabulary related to a topic or invent a short dialogue relevant to functions such as directions or shopping. In the process, they base their information on their knowledge of life, their background knowledge. So, the top-down approaches, and they use the vocabulary and sentences, the bottom-up approach. The result is more integrated attempt at processing. The learners are activating their previous knowledge. This use of combination of top-down and bottom-up data is also called interactive model or interactive processing. The second principle of teaching listening skill is expose students to different types of listening. It's not just what they are listening to, it's what they are listening for. We need to focus the purpose of why a learner wants to increase or improve his listening power. Any discussion of listening tasks has to include a consideration of types of listening. We will consider tasks as well as texts. When discussing listening, texts refers to whatever the students are listening to, often a recording. For the purpose of this discussion, consider this dialogue. Look at the example. Let's go outside. We could go for a walk, maybe play tennis. B says, look out the window, it's raining. A, raining? Oh no. Now look. This is a simple conversation between two participants. Even beginner students can easily understand and produce this dialogue. The most common type of listening exercise in many textbooks is listening for specific information. You ask your student that listen to this dialogue and you ask them to identify names or times or specific language parts or anything. You ask them to identify and write on the page when you listen to the dialogue. This is called listening for specific information task. At other times, students try to understand in a more general way. This is global or just listening. They want to understand the main idea behind a dialogue they are exposed to. This is a different type of listening. Another type of listening is called inference. This is listening between the lines. That is listening for meaning that is implied but not stated directly. In our let's go outside example, we can ask, do the speaker go outside or not? Of course they don't. It's raining. The text doesn't say that directly, but it can be inferred by the student if you ask them to do so. Learners can infer the information. Inference is different from just and specific information listening, in that it often occurs at the same time as some other types of listening. The learner's main task might well be to catch specifics or to understand a text generally when they come across information that is not stated directly. Because references require somewhat abstract thinking, it is a higher level skill. However, it is a mistake to put off working on inference until learners are at intermediate level or above. Indeed, it is often at the beginning level, when students lack much vocabulary, grammar, and functional routines, that students tend to infer the most. The third principle of teaching listening skill is teach a variety of tasks. If learners need experience with different types of listening text, they also need to work with a variety of tasks. If you as a teacher are performing one task each day, it becomes monotonous. They become bored with their task. So, it is good to arrange as many activities as you can. In one example, you can ask your students to listen to the story and to write the summary of the story in English. The same story can be used for another task, as you can ask them to listen to the story and write the character names. This time it is listening for specific information. You can also ask them to repeat the way the story is pronounced and the story is read by a native speaker. Alternatively, the students or the learners could number pictures or events in the order they occur or identify pictures that match the text. All of this means that we should not limit ourselves and our students to few receptive tasks. We should and we must think about new tasks and new activities while teaching listening skills. The fourth principle is consider text, difficulty, and authenticity. In addition to the task, the text itself determines how easy or difficult something is to understand. Spoken language is very different from written language, and we have already discussed it. There are certain features that makes a text or a dialogue difficult for a student, or it can make it easy for the students. Speed is one of the factor. It is of course not the only variable, it is one of the factors. Brown talks about cognitive load and describes 6 factors that increase or decrease the difficulty of the text. The first one, he says, more voices increase difficulty. If a single person is explaining something in the audio, it is easy for the student to listen and understand. On the other hand, if there are many people discussing one point, the student then face problems and difficulties. Now, the clear voice or the distinct position of individual or the distinct form of individuals in the dialogue can increase and decrease the difficulty. For example, you have 2 participants in your dialogue and one is male and the other is female. It is easy for a student to understand, but if there are 2-3 males and 2-3 females, then it is difficult. The third factor, he says, that simple specific spatial relationships are easier to understand than complex ones. In regarding giving directions, information like turn right at the bank is easier to understand than go a little way on that street. The order of event also has an impact. It is easier when the information given follows the order it happened, as opposed to the story that includes a flashback technique. The number of inferences needed. Now, if your dialogue needs fewer inferences on the part of the students, it is easy for them to understand. The next is the information is consistent with what the listener already knows. If the information and the dialogue is related to the background knowledge of the student, she may easily understand it. Now, regarding authenticity, it should be kept in mind that the language that is selected for listening tasks should be realistic and authentic. It must be related with the real life situations. These 2 scholars suggest looking at 2 aspects of authenticity: the task and the input. In connection to the task authenticity, they say that simulated, modeled after a real-life, non-academic task such as filling in a form are authentic for the students and they are easier to understand. Minimal incidental like check understandings but in a way that isn't usually done outside of the classroom, numbering pictures to show a sequence of events, or identifying the way something is said, or some of the examples. Such tasks are very authentic at the beginner and intermediate level. Now, what is input authenticity? It must be genuine, created only for the realm of the real life, not for classroom, but used in language teaching altered. No meaning change, but the original is no longer as it was. Glossing, visual resetting, pictures or colors adapted to simplify the text. Simulated written by the author is if the material is genuine. Many genuine characteristics, minimal incidental, created for classrooms, no attempts to make the material seem genuine. It means that the material that is selected or the listening dialogues or the listening text that is selected for the students should be genuine. It must be connected to the real life. There might be some changes brought by the teachers, but these changes of colors, pictures and glossary, and they can make it simple language of the text, but it should not look artificial. It must be genuine, life-based texts. The fifth principle is teaching listening strategies. There are different strategies that should be transferred and that should be taught to the students. The student should be able to predict. Effective listeners think about what they will hear. They can predict before listening. The students must be able to infer the meaning, something that is not said directly in the text. They should be able to know it. They should also be able to monitor their own understanding while listening to a text. Responding learners react to what they hear. They must respond, and evaluating their check on how well they have understood. They must know, and their teachers should also know. Now some classroom techniques and tasks. This section is related to a variety of exercises that can be used in the classroom. The first thing that usually teachers they use is the dictation. Dictation is an activity related to listening for specific information. It is a completely bottom-up activity. The student focus each and every word and then they write it. There is only one problem, that the student they focus on word level. That's why they are not able to get the meaning of the oral text. The same dictation can be used in another way. You can give them the story and then they listen to the information and they fill the gaps. There are some words that you have skipped in the story. This could be another dictation task, which is comparatively easier than the first one. You might want to add different tasks just for the variety in your textbook. Micro listening usually done after they know the main topic of the recording, but before they have begun the main listening task. Choose a few target items that occur several times on the recording. Example might be names of colors, peoples, places, etc. In class, tell the students the topic of the recording. Ask them to listen for the target items. Bits and pieces, it can be done before the main task. It's a pre-listening activity. You can ask your student to think about the vocabulary that could be there used in the dialogue. They brainstorm the vocabulary and then they listen the dialogue and they encircle the word they hear in the case they have guessed. There is another one, what do I want to know? It is also a pre-listening activity. It could be a group activity, a pair activity. You can ask the student to sit in groups or in pairs and write 2 to 3 questions about the dialogues they will be hearing, and check whether the questions they are writing about the dialogue they are answered in the recording. Dictation and close. Many books features close. Fill in the blanks. Dictation is listening. There is another one, listening for gist or global listening. You should also work on global listening in teaching listening skills. There might be variety of tasks and exercises. For the first task, the students are asked to listen to the general meaning of 5 conversations. Conversation between a doctor and a patient or any other 2 participants. For the second task, the students are asked to listen to the conversation again and to write keywords in the conversation. And this is an excellent way. In the end, you can ask them to write the summary or the main idea of the whole recording. Listening between the lines, the last I as mentioned earlier, it is a difficult task. It requires abstract processing and thinking. Try to select a dialogue which is rich in terms of inferences and then ask the student to infer particular information. These are some of the tasks and techniques used in the classroom for teaching listening skills. While teaching listening skills, keep one thing in mind, that your lesson should be divided into 3 sections. Pre-listening activities, before listening, whatever activities you want to conduct, while listening activities, the activities you want to conduct while the students are listening to the text, and post-listening activity, the activities or the questions or the tasks you want to give to the students after listening tasks. This is all about teaching listening skills. Thank you so much.